Welcome everyone to another live episode of Level Up Law. We're here at South Carolina Legal Services every Tuesday at noon. We are leveling up your legal knowledge about an area of law that we practice in. And also we often, as we're doing today, share some information from our partners and folks we work with out there in the legal community. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm Senior Staff Attorney Susan Ingalls. I'm here with our producer, Kenneth Elliott, who's in the background, making sure that all the bells and whistles are working for us. You are viewing live Dr. David Mahatha. He is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of South Carolina School of Law. Dave is the first person to hold that position at the law school. So we're just really excited to hear about what is going on. Especially because it's Black History Month and Dr. Mahatha will be filling us in on what the law school is doing to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. But before we get started, as always, we do want you to know this is not legal advice. It's just general information for the public. If you need the help of a lawyer, we do want you to definitely call our intake line here at South Carolina Legal Services or apply online, and all that information will be provided at the end of this presentation. I do want you to look at your screen right now and scan that QR code. We have a newsletter that goes out to everybody who is subscribed to it, and that little QR code is how you can subscribe to our newsletter. So take a look at that, give it a scan. We'd love to be sending out our newsletter to as many people as possible. And also, as a reminder, all of our episodes are posted by our producer, Kenneth Elliott, to our Level Up Law playlist on our YouTube channel. And that's usually same day or within 24 hours. So go to SC Legal Services on YouTube, and you can find this and the over 100 other episodes we have there on the Level Up Law playlist at our YouTube channel. Real quickly, Dr. Mahatha can answer general questions if there's time at the conclusion of today's presentation. So definitely, if you have any questions for him, please put them in the question box on your screen. And as a reminder, while I've got your attention, do be sure to check out our social media. You can find all kinds of updated information, connections to resources that we have, not only Level Up Law, but all the other great resources we have here at South Carolina Legal Services. It's a great way to connect with all that information. The websites, again, and the social media handles can be found at the conclusion of today's presentation. Now, the QR code you should be scanning right now on your screen is the QR code for giving us your idea about a topic that you would like to hear about. So scan that QR code, go straight to that form, and give us your thoughts on what you'd like us to talk about. We've got plenty of topics, but we want to hear what you guys out there in our audience want to know about. So definitely scan that QR code and do that for us. We really appreciate it. All right, so at this time, Dr. Mahatha, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is David Mahatha, Dr. David Mahatha. I'm still getting used to that, doctor. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the School of Law. It is my pleasure to be with you today, and we're going to talk about building a culture of belonging for law school students. First, we're going to cover what having a sense of belonging actually means, because it actually means different things to different people. And so we're going to cover that and why having this sense of belonging is so important to student success. Then we will pivot slightly and talk about how we at the School of Law have grounded our DEI work, both theoretically and practically, and our initiatives and programs to increase students' sense of belonging and success. So let's get started. So first, I want to set us up so that we will all have a shared understanding and clarity when it comes to these DEIB concepts. Creating shared language was one of the first things we did when I took my role on at the School of Law. We all know what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean, but most often we aren't able to articulate it to a point where we truly understand it and to a point where others will agree with our definition. We know it when we see it, but we can't define it. And that's something we have to fix, because you can't create shared goals, develop programming, and align your policies and practices around DEI if you don't agree on what the terms mean and really have a shared understanding of what they are. And so what we did was we gathered our faculty, our staff, our students together, and collaboratively, they defined what these terms meant for the institution, for the School of Law, and they gave us a foundation of how we can build out our work in the future. The first term, diversity, it is a concept represented by a group of people that collectively maintain and display a broad spectrum of human attributes, perspectives, identities, backgrounds, and disciplines. Really, plain and simple, diversity is about the various ways we all show up. We show up at school, we show up in our work, in our places of employment. All of that diverse, all of the ways we are unique and special. Often we focus just on gender, race, and ethnicity, but diversity is much more than that. It is the ways we are unique, whether that is through ideology, whether that is through mental health, that is through how we learn and how we operate and engage with other people. That is also diversity in our faiths, our religions, and our ability to do things or our ability to live with a disability. All of this is diversity. And so we have to broaden our idea of what diversity is when we are in this work, and not just focus on gender, race, and ethnicity. Inclusion, and we're going to skip equity right now and then come back to it. Inclusion is a process. It is not just a state, but it's an ongoing process. And our committee defined it as a process of active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with diversity that strives to increase awareness and empathetic understanding of the varying ways that individuals interact with existing systems and institutions. What all that means is that now that we have diverse individuals in our schools, we have them in our workplaces, how are we engaging them? How are we interacting with them? How are we giving them voice? This is important, because just because you have them there doesn't mean that they are engaged and they are included in decision making. How do we do that? But that's what we have to do in this inclusion stage. How are we involving them in planning and decision making? Simply using their gifts and their talents. How are we doing that? We've got to move beyond simply having diverse individuals, but to now engaging them and including them in the organization. So that's inclusion. The next statement, or the next concept that we had to define, was equity. Equity, they defined it as a goal of fair and impartial access to membership, resources, opportunities, and benefits for underrepresented and underserved populations. Equity is about asking those important questions. How are we doing right by our people? What are we doing right for them? How are we treating them fairly? Treating them fairly in our processes, in our structures, in our practices? Are we giving them the support and the access to opportunities that they need? It's not something that we simply answer in a quick, with a quick answer. It's a process that we have to engage in to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to get to that successful outcome. What are we doing to help everyone be successful and doing it fairly? So that's equity. We're going to skip belonging because we're going to talk about it really in detail soon. So we're going to skip that right now and talk about the state of the law profession and the state of law school. That's why we have the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the School of Law. There was a need, and we're going to talk about that need. So when we look at this chart, hold on, let me move my screen so I can be with you. We're going to talk about women of color, we're going to talk about women, and we're going to talk about people of color. This chart, which focuses on lawyers in the law firms, shows us that some positive movement in the law profession has happened as it relates to women, people of law, and specifically women of color, or excuse me, people of color, and specifically women of color in the last 2 decades. But it also shows we have a long way to go. We can't just be happy about some of the progress. We've got to make sure that we continue the progress. And so to be clear, again, this chart only captures law firms and does not capture the number of attorneys in other areas or of the field. So let's look at this. So the percentage of all women attorneys has increased almost 10%, but the percentage of women of color with an almost 5% increase did not grow as rapidly. We saw some growth, but it did not grow as rapidly. So why is that? What are the factors that contribute to that? This brings up the idea of simply our ability to create additional hardships on people based on their identity. And that's what we really talk about when we talk about intersectionality. Intersectionality is when some cultural groups, like women of color, experience a unique and different level of disadvantage simply because of their multiple and intersecting identities that intersect and interact in society, and therefore causing them to have more disadvantage and their life experiences and barriers to become harder and more challenging. I always tell people, you look at the great numbers, we're moving up, women are moving up, men, people of color in general are moving up, women of color are moving up, but when you dig deep, what's stopping people from really being at their best? What's keeping them, what's preventing them from really succeeding as much as they could? And that's what this work is about. This work is about looking at it at the very minute level and to determine what can we do as an institution to make sure everyone's outcome is equitable, fair, and they have the opportunity to be successful. So that is the profession. Now let's look at law schools, what's happening in law schools. So from this chart, I'm gonna move mine up. There we go. From this chart, once again, we see upward movement. We see that the 1Ls increase 30 to 34.7%. That is great. For those were the people who identified as members of racially or ethnically minoritized or marginalized groups. That was 2% up from fall of 2021. Great. That was also 6% more from a decade ago. Wonderful. We saw women who went down a little, but not really substantially. So there's still some growth. There's still some room to improve on that, but they didn't drop too much. But we know that we should be getting them more. That should be going up rather than going down, even though it was a small percentage. What are we doing to make sure it continues to go up? So we have great news, right? Pretty great. Yes, but, and this is the big but that I think all institutions have to look at. And those are institutions for law schools, as well as organizations, businesses. Just because you have them, now what are you doing to keep them? And so our question for us is, what are we doing to retain them and to graduate them? There are some schools, as you can see from this graphic, some schools of law had attrition rates as high as 25 to 30% for students of color. We got them, Fortunately, that was not South Carolina, so I have to put that in there. But schools of law overall, we got them, but we didn't keep them. And why is that? We've got to look at why. You know, last year, the American Bar Association said or this past fall, that it was the most diverse 1L class in history. Now we have to keep them and we have to graduate them, because those are the people who will improve those numbers that I showed in the previous section about the profession. We've got to prepare them here in law school so that they can then go out into the profession. So what are we doing to keep them and retain them? So that's belonging. That is all the work of belonging. What we do to keep them is about belonging. Move my screen up. A recent study found that having a lack of sense of belonging in law schools significantly impacted student satisfaction, academic performance, and therefore student retention. Didn't keep them. Some students didn't feel supported or connected to their peers, or they didn't feel a strong relationship to faculty or staff, and left, while some stayed, but they weren't able to be successful because resources, tools weren't in place to help them be successful. So it is true that sometimes students do not do well because they are not academically prepared. That's true. That's common sense, right? But in many cases, research has told us that a lot of times people don't do well, and that's students as well as employees don't do well, particularly if they're disadvantaged, they're from disadvantaged and marginalized cultural groups. They don't do well and aren't successful because they don't have the necessary resources and support in place and available to be successful. Organizations, schools of law, you have to provide those opportunities and resources to help them. You know, most of our students in law school, a lot of them, I won't say most, but a lot of them, particularly our marginalized students, disadvantaged students, they don't come from backgrounds or households where it was full of lawyers and attorneys. They didn't grow up around that. They don't know the processes. They don't know the culture. They don't have that at-home support that many other students have. And so we've got to make sure these first-generation college students have the support and resources to be successful. And that's what we're doing at the School of Law. We're looking at all of it to make sure. And from a law school perspective, I just have to add, this is how we retain them, and this is how we graduate. We put the interest, we put the resources in places that we know that they're needed the most. That's what it's about. So that's belonging. Now let's talk about just defining it. We defined the rest of them, so I'm going to define what sense of belonging meant to those at the School of Law. We said sense of belonging first is a feeling and a perception that one is accepted, respected, valued by others within a group, organization, and community. They are connected and committed to other members in a caring and mutually beneficial relationship. There's a level of self-efficacy and assurance in both self and in the organization. We're going to talk about that. And there's a fundamental need that everyone in some way and at some point seeks to feel and is motivated to act and behave in ways in the attempt to feel that need. So what does that mean? So people want to feel like they're valued. People want to feel respected. People want to feel that they have that they contribute to the mission, to the purpose, that they can do and can be successful if the right resources are in place. People want to feel that. That's human nature. That's not something that people make up. It's something, those of you who know Maslow, belonging was one of those levels or those factors that people or levels of needs that people needed. People want to feel connected. You know, I have to say sometimes more than others, I just want to know someone has my back. I just want to know that someone is supporting me. I want to make sure that someone has my best interests at heart. And those of you who work in education or you work in the field, you know that is often displayed in how leadership engages and communicates with us. How inclusive is my manager? How inclusive is my leader? Does my leader take risks to make sure that all people have access to resources, opportunities? How inclusive? That's what it's about. So if I want to feel connected, if I want to feel that I have a shared purpose, I need my leadership to really put interest and put focus on me. And that's what we're trying to do with our students at the School of Law. We're trying to put an interest, a focus on their success. It's not just about numbers. It's about their success. And how do we make that a priority, not just for some students, but for all students, you know? And what it's important, I really want to focus on that last bullet. We all want to belong. We all do. It's natural. And if we don't feel like we belong, most likely we'll leave. And that's for law school, that's for our organizations, our businesses. If people don't feel like they are connected to one another, they'll leave. And so we've got to make sure we create a culture where everybody feels connected, feels valued, feels respected, feels like they can grow and develop in that place. And that takes a little more than just adding bodies, which is diversity. We're just adding diverse people. Now we're looking at making sure that everyone feels connected to one another and feels valued in the organization. So that sense of belonging. Why is that important? One, again, academic satisfaction and performance. Research tells us the more a person feels connected and feels that sense of belonging, the better they're going to be in school. Why? Because they're gonna be motivated. They're gonna have that drive to go to tutoring. They're gonna have that drive to ask a professor to make time for them outside of the classroom, because they have that self-efficacy that if I know my school supports me, I know the resources are there to support me, I'm going to take advantage of it. And so therefore, that effort is there. So they're going to perform better. They're going to trust other people better. They're going to trust their colleagues, their peers, they're going to trust faculty and staff. Why wouldn't you focus on sense of belonging as a law school? Employers, those of you who have staff, same thing for you. You want your employees to perform well, you want them to be satisfied, you want them to have that drive, that motivation, you want them to really trust and collaborate with one another. Research tells us, boost, increase their sense of belonging. That is how you can improve. That's where you need to put your efforts, right? So now that we've talked about that, let's talk about the good stuff. How do we put all of that into what we're doing at the School of Law? So I want to first say that this DEI work did not just come, out of the air, just on a whim. Our administration really saw the need to do a diversity internal audit in 2021. And through that, it determined that there were certain areas that we needed to focus on, that we needed to put some energy to, that we needed to put some resources to, if we really wanted to increase retention and increase graduation for our diverse students, our marginalized and minoritized students. There were things that we needed to do. And so part of that was bringing me on and really focusing on certain things. And so as I am doing my work to improve the culture, I'm following this model, which is a national model. It's called inclusive excellence. And what it really boils down to are really two things. One is the premise that diversity is a strength and not a liability. Do not think that we hear the argument diversity causes conflict. Well, it can, but from conflict, good things can come from that. Innovation can come from that. New perspectives can come from that. Growth comes from that. So diversity is not a liability. It is a strength. Second thing is that diversity, equity, inclusion has to be embedded and infused in the entire organization. It is not enough to just hire someone to have your office of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and think that that role, that department is solely responsible for this work. It has to be institutional. It has to be company-wide. It has to be school-wide, college-wide. Everybody has to be a DEI administrator, not just the person who is hired as your DEI director or associate dean. And so what we're doing is we're collaborating with everyone at the School of Law, and everyone is getting involved in this work. And we're going to talk about how we're doing that right now. So first part of this model says practice, the practice for access and success. What we want to do is remove barriers and give diverse people agency and options. How are we doing that? So one of the ways is that we're looking at our recruiting efforts. How are we reaching out to recruit more diverse applicants? How are we reaching out to include or recruit more diverse faculty? What are our relationships with HBCUs or historically Black colleges and universities or other MSIs, minority serving institutions, and even community colleges? Because diversity is not just about a race and ethnicity, but also socioeconomic status. So how are we reaching out to institutions that could perhaps provide some great candidates for both students and for faculty and staff? What are we doing about that? And so we're working with admissions, looking at that process. How do we reach more people who could use the support, who could use the extra push? Second thing, important thing, again, it's not about numbers, but about available access and support for everyone, for everyone's success. Everyone needs support, right? Well, let's provide that for them. Academic support services. One of the things we're doing is our Kickstart program. Our faculty, our Associate Dean for Academic Affairs has been working on a Kickstart program where we know students who will be great students at the law school. They've been accepted, but perhaps they don't have the experience that they need, perhaps in critical writing or in other aspects to really do well in law school. They were admitted. We know they can do well, but we are providing a Kickstart program, which is between orientation and the first day of school, where students are coming in. It's like a boot camp, where they're getting those skills that they need to really do well in class. That's academic support for particular students. Career professional development for our students. I'm asking our career professional development department to really look at partnering with our affinity groups, partnering with minority or people of color attorneys who can create mentoring opportunities for students. How do we prepare our students, provide that support, again, so that they can do well? Because we know they can, they just need that additional support. Scholarships and other financial supports, whether that is, for instance, a diversity clerkship. How do we make sure students, all students, but particularly students of color, particularly students who have not had the exposure and have not been represented as much, how do they get those opportunities? Pipelines, the next one, pipelines. I'm really excited about this one because in the fall, we're going to start a middle school pipeline. So we know that to get students ready for law school, it starts way before high school. So we're working with a middle school here in Columbia, and we're going to start a program for our middle school students to help them develop those skills so that if they choose to go to law school, they've already started developing that critical thinking skills, problem solving skills. We also are working with high school administrators so that the following year, we can hopefully start a high school pipeline program, perhaps a summer program or residential program, something where we are making sure students early are preparing for opportunities where they can go to law school. Again, that's access, removing barriers, access, and success. Finally, for this area, we're doing onboarding and orientation. These are things that are going to be ongoing. So first stop is going to be orientation. How do we give students a voice in orientation? How do we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Those of you who are attorneys, you know the ABA has now mandated that we provide that cultural competency, cultural competency experiences for our students. So we're looking at that at orientation. We're going to have ongoing opportunities as well. But we also want to talk about onboarding for employees. How do we do that for employees where they come in feeling welcomed, where they come in feeling valued, where they come in knowing that their skills and talents are welcomed, are invited. They feel that they can be their authentic selves. And so that's an ongoing process that we're working on. Next, our next area, climate and intergroup relations. The practice for this is you give voice to others. You celebrate identities, you tell their stories, and you ask for feedback. People want to be heard. People want to feel that they have voice. They want to feel celebrated. And so this particular practice means that we've got to make sure that we're doing certain things. And one is listening to people through a climate survey. So we're going to have regular climate surveys for students and hopefully faculty and staff. We want to know what you feel like this environment is offering you. Where do you feel like this environment could improve? Where you can feel more connected. And so we want to get that feedback, but we also want to create actionable plans from that feedback. A lot of times organizations collect surveys or they do surveys, collect data, and they do nothing with it. And that only creates even more disappointment from employees because they say, I'm given this, but you aren't actually using it. So we want to create actionable programs. And so that's one of the steps that we're working on. We're increasing dialogues and courageous conversations. One of the first things I heard from students, even in my interview process, I want to talk about some issues. I want us to have a forum where we can give our opinions, where we can talk about things that we haven't always talked about, particularly around things like race and gender differences. And so we want to have more dialogue and conversation, courageous conversations about that. More diverse guest speakers. Some of you may have come to the School of Law in January. We had the president of the American Bar Association, a wonderful opportunity, not just for the community or for faculty and staff, but a wonderful opportunity for students of color, particularly women of color, our students, to see someone doing something great, to be able to connect with that person, to speak with that person. It was a learning opportunity. And it's something that we've got to continue, because if I see someone who looks like me succeeding, that builds my self-efficacy, where I believe I can do it because I've seen it done. And so we want to increase those outcomes. Artwork, pictures in the physical building. That may seem minor to some, but when you are a person of color or a member of the LGBTQ community, to see someone who looks like you on the wall is important. All of our artwork should not be old white men. Nothing against the older white male generation, but we have a diverse student body. They need to see people who look like them. And so we're looking at even artwork and pictures so that it is more welcoming. It is more inclusive. That is all that we're doing with that. We're aligning our business practices. We have a motto of lawyer leader. What does that mean? And how do our practices, everyday practices, align with that so that we are inclusive and welcoming? We have student-led affinity groups. These are students who connect with one another. They support one another. These are opportunities for them to build that sense of belonging. And of course, our monthly cultural celebrations. In April, we're going to have Celebrating Diversity Day, which is a time for the entire School of Law to celebrate our diverse identities. And it's a time where we want people to always feel proud, but this is one day we want to come together and really celebrate all that we are and all just who we are. And so that's important. Next one is our institutional infrastructure. This practice really focuses on the use of metrics and other evidence to drive intentional decision-making around DEI in our policies, practices, operations, and structures. We are really focusing on collaboration. Again, this DEI work is not about me. It's not about my associate dean. It's about all of us doing this work together, setting goals together. How are we setting diversity goals together? How are we doing our cultural and diversity programming in education? How are we working across? So academic affairs, student affairs, everyone is involved in this process collaboratively. I am really pushing the next thing, disaggregated data. Again, it is wonderful to know that we have 90% employment, or we have 90%, 95%, or whatever graduation rate. That is wonderful. But when we get down to it, it's important that we get down to the lower levels. What are our students of color? What are our members with living with a disability? What are LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus students? How are they doing? If they aren't doing well, then we need to fix it, because everybody has to do well, not just some groups. And so that takes really looking at disaggregated data, not just the overall number, but what are people doing below that number. And that's a part of assessment and monitoring our practices. If we know the numbers aren't good, what are we doing to fix those numbers? And then next, our DEI communication strategy. I met with our comms team, and we created a formal strategy where we're spreading the word about this work. And that's important because people want to know that you're actually doing something, that you really care about us, and you're actually putting forth the effort. So we are really pushing to share what's happening in our DEI office to make sure that everyone knows that we are really looking out for them. And so that took a communication strategy. And then just sustained support. We have a great dean who is really looking at budget and resources to make sure that we continue to make a difference, that we continue to put the effort so that all students can be successful, that we retain them, that we graduate them, that they get jobs, that they are successful. That's what it's all about. Next, the practice, we're talking about education, scholarship, and research. In this practice, where people need to include varied perspectives and learning experiences and offer professional development opportunities to improve everyone's cultural competence. One of the things that we are doing is inclusive teaching for our faculty. It's important that faculty know how to teach different people, diverse learners, whether that is culturally diverse, whether it's learning style diversity. Faculty need that development, and so we're offering that, which is a wonderful thing. Again, we're doing new student orientation so that students come in knowing that diversity, equity, and inclusion are valued at the School of Law from the very beginning, and that we should be able to talk about these topics, that should be a comfort level and not an area of angst and disagreement. And so we're putting that forth in our orientation. Again, we're training for current students. We're pushing that for next year, or continuing students. Staff development opportunities, we're also going to focus on that, and then faculty scholarship as it relates to DEI. They're doing some great things now. And so we want to promote that, and we want to really spread that and communicate that to the community of the great things that they're doing. Next, and the final thing, is community engagement and partnership. And that relates to a practice where you create partnerships in the local community to improve outcomes, reduce disparities for underrepresented and underserved populations. And what we're doing with that is that our faculty and our staff, they are working on projects and programs that are really looking at how can we impact the outcomes of our marginalized and disadvantaged community or populations in the local community or the state community. What can we do to make sure their outcomes are better? And so a lot of our faculty and staff are working on programs intentionally for that. And that's what this is about. An example for this, example of this would be our DISCO program. It is a partnership with Allen University, where we're teaching a faculty member, our associate dean is going to teach critical thinking and critical writing skills to help them, whether they decide to go to law school or not. Those are skills that they can take with them and do better and progress wherever they go, in whatever field they go in. And so that is an opportunity that we are making a difference in the community. And so finally, I just want to wrap up with our definitions. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, the definition and experience. Belonging is about the experience of perceiving, believing, and knowing that one has been accepted as an equal member of a diverse, equitable, and inclusive group. You can't be successful. And I shouldn't say this, but I am going to say this. I don't think an institution can be successful if you're not focusing on people's sense of belonging, because that is how they grow. That is why they stay. That is why they put forth the effort. It is that motivating factor. And so I encourage all of you, when you get with your colleagues, discuss these terms. Figure out your own shared definitions around them. Figure out how you, as an institution, organization, business, whatever it is, how you are collectively and collaboratively creating an environment where everyone feels a sense of belonging, because that's what it's all about. And thank you. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Mahatha, that was terrific. I can't thank you enough for being with us. You've got such ambitious plans, and I know you've got your work cut out for you. But you guys, you're not just talking, you're doing, and I love that. It was a great presentation about the specific things. And I know you're the first one in the position there at the law school. So, you know, I love that you're doing, you know, you've laid out for us some really specific things that you're leading the law school to do. And it's just, as a graduate myself, as an alumni, I'm really appreciative of the work that you guys are doing. There is one question because it's actually, you know, and I think this is important for someone who may be in your position or new to a position of this nature like you are, and, you know, watching this presentation. What would you say is kind of your advice to someone who's kind of in your shoes where you were when you walked into USC Law School? And, you know, kind of what were your priorities and how did you hit the ground running, basically?
I think the number one priority for someone in this role has to be to listen. It was important for me to meet with faculty, to meet with students, to meet with staff, to listen to their experiences, there is one thing I always say when I talk about this work, is that there's one thing I cannot argue with, and that is someone else's experience. It was their experience. And I have to respect that. And so I want to hear their experiences, because from that sets the stage. It helps us set goals. Where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? It's wrong to come into a situation or to a new position like this and think you know the answers and think you have the answers. Every institution or every organization is different. And so it's important to hear the experiences of those who actually have lived it in that particular environment. And so that's one of the things I was fortunate to do. I came in December, which was kind of a slow time. And so I was able to really talk with people. And together we decided what the goals would be. So that's really the priority when you first come in.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I know you kind of explained at the very beginning of your presentation how you did that with talking to, getting all that input. So I love that. Well, that is all we have. As I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much, Dr. David Mahatha, for a terrific presentation. Really appreciate you being with us. Great information, not just for us, but for others who are doing this kind of work. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us here each week or later on the replay on YouTube. We really appreciate everyone being here. And I do want to say, if you found this to be helpful, I'm sure you did, and you think it would be helpful to others, please do go to our YouTube channel. And yeah, that's, as I said before, at South Carolina Legal Services, and share this broadcast. Let's go to that final slide, Dr. Mahatha, so we can share that information with our viewers. This is how you can contact legal services, not just to apply for our assistance, but also to get information about the various topics that we cover in our practice of law. There's that QR code again. You can scan and jump on our newsletter list. We'd love to have you for that. And also, when you go to our social media, please be sure and follow us officially, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's growing every day, and we really appreciate that. And sign up for the alert so you'll know every time we post a new video, because if you can't join us live, you can always go back and watch the recording, and we get a lot of views on that channel with people doing it that way, so be sure and do that. Now, finally, thanks for being with us, but also be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Level Up Law on Tuesday at noon. Next week is Consumer Protection Week, and we'll be talking about debt collection, but as part of our focus for the month, we are specifically addressing special populations in our state. The presentation next week will be in Spanish, and we're also throughout the month going to other special populations and talking about consumer protection law. Most importantly, our Native American population will be addressing as well. So we're really excited to, for the month of March, focus our consumer protection advocacy and sharing of resources with those special populations. So thanks again for tuning in with us today. Thanks so much to Dr. David Mahatha, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of South Carolina School of Law. We appreciate you being with us. That concludes today's webinar. Thanks for joining us.